So yesterday in class we started to talk about romanticism, romantic poetry in particular, and the poem we read, who remembers who wrote the poem we read yesterday? Lines Written Early Spring? Kanoy?
William Wordsworth.
William Wordsworth, excellent. So today in class we're actually going to be looking at William Wordsworth's definition of poetry, what a good poem should have and what a poet should do. So we're going to be looking at how he defined poetry and how he defined a poet, all right? But before we start reading and analyzing that, who can remind us of those 5 characteristics of romanticism that we talked about yesterday? Naya?
Okay.
Just give me one.
Oh, okay. Interest in the common man and childhood.
Interest in the common man and childhood. Good. Tyler?
We also have awe of nature.
Awe of nature. Good. Brianna?
Celebration of the individual.
Celebration of the individual. Khalil?
Strong senses, emotions, and feelings.
Strong senses, emotions, and feelings. Good. And then Kanita?
Importance of imagination.
Importance of imagination. Okay, so those are the themes that we will see across romantic poetry. But we want to talk for a minute about what a good poem should be. Now, in your notes from yesterday, I gave you a quote from Wordsworth, just a little snippet of what he said all good poetry should do. Can anyone find that and remind us? Maybe someone who hasn't spoken up yet. All right, Nala?
All good poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings.
All right. All good poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. And we talked about that on Tuesday. Can someone put that in their own words for me? What does he mean when he says that? Tyler?
I think he's trying to say that writers should just let their emotions flow on their paper rather than trying to impress someone.
Okay, so a poem should be just letting your emotions flow out, trying to communicate how you feel to your audience. And in this excerpt we read today, he's going to talk about how you can do that, how you can train yourself to do that. Because if I told you just to turn on your emotions and just flow and write for 5 minutes, how many of you think you would be able just to concentrate and write for 5 minutes without stopping and being like, what? I'm confused, I don't know what to write. How many of you think you could really just turn on your emotions and write for 5 straight minutes? Let me see your hands.
Yeah, probably.
Okay, some of you can, some of you can. For me, that's always been difficult because I stop and second guess myself and I think about it too hard and I get confused. So in this excerpt, he talks about how a poet can train himself to do that. Okay? So does everyone have this sheet in front of them?
Yes.
Who's missing it? Alexis? All right. So this is the preface to Lyrical Ballads. Lyrical Ballads was a collection of poetry that Wordsworth published with his friend Samuel Taylor Coleridge. We're actually going to be looking at one of his poems in class tomorrow, a poem that came from this collection. So the purpose of Lyrical Ballads was William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge decided they wanted to go on vacation and they needed some money. And they were like, well, we're such great poets. Why don't we collect some of our poetry and sell it to get money for our vacation? So they did that. It didn't quite work out. They didn't make that much money. And then 2 years later, Wordsworth wrote a preface and republished the poems. Now this preface is where he really defined what a good poem should do and what a poet should do in order to be a good poet. All right? So what we're going to do is we're going to read this passage chunk by chunk together. After I read each section, we're just going to discuss it and paraphrase it. Then I'm going to give you some time in your groups to answer questions. All right? So he begins by saying, the poems in these volumes will be found distinguished at least by one mark of difference, that each of them has a worthy purpose. Not that I always begin to write with a distinct purpose formerly conceived, but habits of meditation have, I trust, so prompted and regulated my feelings that my descriptions of such objects as strongly excite those feelings will be found to carry along with them a purpose. All right? So let's take a minute to think about it and then kind of rephrase what he said in our own words. What did he say distinguishes his poems from all other poems? Simeon?
All his poems have a purpose.
Have a purpose. Have a worthy purpose, okay? But then he clarifies and says that when he sits down to write, he doesn't necessarily have a what?
Purpose.
Have a clear purpose or a clear plan, a clear vision, okay? But what has he done? What is so special about him that he can write and his poetry will communicate this purpose? What does he say he's done? Meditate. Okay, he says that he's meditated, okay? So he says, my poems are distinguished from other poems because they have a clear and worthy purpose. And that worthy purpose is there because I've meditated. And he can, what is it that he can convey so strongly in his poetry? His feelings. Okay, because he has meditated, because he has such clear thought, he can very easily convey his feelings in his poem. Okay? So who can, in a sense, maybe summarize what he just said. Naya.
So basically, he said, my poems are different from other poems because they have a purpose. They have this purpose because I meditate, and my poems will show my feelings.
Okay, good. So his poems have a purpose because he's such a deep thinker and he's meditated so clearly, and this purpose is to convey his feelings, okay? And he's going to go into more depth about how he conveys feelings and what this purpose is as we continue reading. All right, any questions about that first chunk of this excerpt? No. Got it?
Yes.
All right, second part. If this opinion be erroneous, what does that word mean, erroneous? To the first part? Incorrect. That first part, error. Erroneous means if it has error. If his opinion that his poems have a worthy purpose, if this opinion be erroneous, I can have little right to the name of poet. For all good poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. And though this be true, poems to which any value can be attached were never produced on any variety of subjects, but by a man who, being possessed of more than usual organic sensibility, had also thought long and deeply. Okay? So if his poems do not have this worthy purpose, he can't call himself what? A poet. So that gives us a clue, and we'll get to this in a little later in class, of how he defines a poet. Okay? A poet must have this worthy purpose, and this worthy purpose involves conveying feelings. Alright, so if his opinion's wrong, he has no right to call himself a poet. And then he does that definition that we had already given. All good poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. So how can we say, how does he define powerful poetry? Or good poetry? In our own words? In our own words. That's his words. Deep feelings. Deep emotions. That the reader can connect to. It expresses. Okay, so all good poetry expresses feelings, but not any kind of feelings. Not like, oh, I kind of like this, I'm kind of happy. Really deep, powerful, life-changing feelings. All right. And he kind of reiterates what he said in this first part. He is able to write this way because what has he done to prepare himself just to turn on his feelings? Meditate. He's thought long and deeply, okay? So, it's yes, okay? He has trained himself to think, to feel, to experience more deeply than other men. And because he can do that, then when he sits down to write, he just turns on those feelings and they come out. All right, so what can we say about this second passage? How can we rephrase this in our own words? Take a second, and then when you're confident, let me know. Marcus?
If the poem doesn't have a purpose, a worthy purpose, then it's not really poetry.
Okay. And how does a poet ensure his poem will have this worthy purpose?
And having deep feeling about it.
Yeah, by having deep feeling and by preparing by thinking long and deep. All right, good. So, you cannot call yourself a poet if your poem does not have this worthy purpose, and you make sure your poems have this worthy purpose by thinking long and deeply. So he's really reiterating these same ideas over and over again. All right? In this next section, he's going to talk more deeply about how you get to this state where you've meditated and you can just turn on your feelings and have this powerful flow of emotions. For our continued influxes of feeling are modified and directed by our thoughts, which are indeed the representatives of all our past feelings. And, as by contemplating the relation of these general representatives to each other, we discover what is really important to men. So, by the repetition and continuance of this act, our feelings will be connected with important subjects, till at length, if we be originally possessed of much sensibility, such habits of mind will be produced that, by obeying blindly and mechanically the impulses of those habits, we shall describe objects and utter sentiments of such a nature and in such connection with each other that the understanding of the reader must necessarily be in some degree enlightened and his affections strengthened and purified. Did anyone notice how many sentences that was?
One.
That was one. That was one grammatically correct sentence. So that's something to be amazed by, first of all. But in this sentence, one sentence, looks like a whole paragraph, he goes in detail about the process a poet must undertake in order to be able to represent the emotions of all mankind. So what must that poet do? And it's kind of the same thing we've been saying all along.
Think on it.
Okay, let's remember our hands. Someone with a hand. I want to see a hand in the air. Naya.
Basically, contemplate whatever you're about to write about.
Okay. Contemplate. Think long and deeply. And when you think long and deeply on a subject, you start to see these connections. You start to discover what? Tyler?
I think you're trying to form a connection between you and your reader.
Okay, you and your reader, you and mankind. And why would that be important to the Romantics to find a connection to mankind? Naya?
Because they have that connection. I mean, they have that interest in man and child.
Yeah, they have an interest in the common man, so they want to find a way to connect to their audience. So he's saying if you meditate on a subject long enough, the importance of it to mankind will be revealed to you, okay? And once you've done this enough, if you are a sensitive enough person, then you will be able to convey your feelings to your readers. Now, the very last part of this sentence explains that if you've done your job correctly, what should happen to your reader, okay? Nala?
They should become enlightened and strengthened and purified.
Okay, you should become enlightened. How can we say that in our own words? What does it mean for the reader to become enlightened? Simeon?
They should learn something.
They should learn something. So if you've done your job, if you've thought long enough and deeply enough on a subject, your reader will learn something, okay? And then what does it mean to have your affections strengthened and purified? What's another word for affections? Sierra?
Well, like, they should feel as if they have a connection, like they're talking, like you wrote about them in a way.
Okay, so it should strengthen the connection between the poet and the reader. It should strengthen their feelings and purify them, all right? So that's a pretty lofty task. He's saying if I do a good job writing a poem, my readers will learn something and their emotions will become stronger and will become more pure. All right, that's a pretty big task to give yourselves. Those poems that you read and shared at the start of class and I collected. How many of you think that you could teach someone something with your poem? That your poem would enlighten the reader? Okay, a couple of us. And I felt enlightened as I heard some of your poems. How many of you think that the poems will strengthen the emotions and purify the emotions of your reader? Okay, so we have some confidence. So maybe I have some budding romantic poems in here. I feel like this is a pretty lofty task to give yourself. All right, so let's bring this all together. The last part. It has been said that each of these poems have a purpose. Another circumstance must be mentioned which distinguishes these poems from the popular poetry of the day. Okay, so he's saying, yes, my poems have a purpose, but they're different from popular poetry of the day because it is this, that the feeling therein developed gives importance to the action and situation, not the action and situation to the feeling. All right, so let's talk about that last part. The feeling gives importance to the action and situation, not the action and situation to the feeling. What is he saying about his poem? What's the important part of his poems?
Say it one more time.
Yeah, say one more time.
Well, it's right there in front of you. Look at it. Just look at it again. The last part of this last section. Brianna?
So I need to say the feeling is the most important part.
Yeah. The feeling is the most important part of his poem, not the action and situation. What's another term in literature for the action and situation? The climax, which is part of the plot. The plot. So what's happening in the poem is not nearly as important as the feeling. In the poem we read Tuesday, what was happening? What was the speaker doing? He was sitting. He was just sitting in a grove of trees. Okay, so he's saying the action isn't important. Sitting in a grove of trees, that's not important. But the feelings that he conveyed, and what was that feeling that he conveyed when he was sitting? Anyone remember? What did he feel? The refrain of the poem? Gwen?
Well, first he was peaceful, and then he got sad and depressed about humanity.
Yes, so first he was happy and peaceful, and then he got sad and depressed about humanity because, Kanoy? Man destroyed itself. Because man was part of nature, and then man has destroyed himself. Does anyone remember the frame? What man is made of man. Okay? So the feeling of that poem was more important than the action in the situation. Alright, so this is how he defines poetry and the purpose of poems and what a poet should do. Now I realize I rambled a little bit because I'm being filmed, I'm a little nervous. So, in your groups, with the people sitting next to you, okay, I want you guys to take just 5 minutes to go ahead and wrap this up, tie it all together by answering those questions. I want you to really think about how does it define a good poem, put that in your own words. What is this worthy purpose of poetry? And the purpose should include how the poetry affects the reader. What characteristics must a good poem have? And then what should a poet do? Okay? So I'm going to give you guys 5 minutes to work with the people near you, and I'll walk around and talk to you about it. Alright? So we have until 12:16. Alright, so where's the definition of a good poem? Alright, so put it in your own words.
I think teaching is good. Do you think it's that, or do you think it was
Does anyone have a eraser, Marcus? Alright, so we have the definition. So, what is the worthy purpose? Okay, he must convey his feelings. By his, yes, so he must convey his feelings. And if he conveys his feelings well, what happens to the reader? Exactly. That's what we're doing. If he does a good job, then you will read his poem and you will feel how he felt and you will understand. Good. Yeah, and that comes down to kind of like what a poet is.
Okay, so the second part is like basically in this paragraph.
What should his poem convey to the reader? What is the most important part of his poem?
Oh, the feelings.
The feelings. The feelings. And if he conveys his feelings strongly enough, if he does a good job conveying his feelings, how does the reader feel after they've read the poem?
Enlightened, and their affection strengthened and purified.
Good. Yes. Yep. Good job.
Based on this characteristics, must be able to come up. Purpose.
Alright, do you think we can be finished up with this in 2 minutes?
Do you
Hit
think
our 5 minute mark?
something like a metaphor?
Alright.
You said what?
Like metaphors,
I mean,
similes?
With the poem, they don't really use the language, figurative language. They
Because
just
it's
show
more-
their emotions.
More on-site type of things.
Yeah.
Characteristics.
They must have deep emotions. And they
So
must have,
what's the most
yeah, they
important
must
part of this poem? What should his poem convey?
A good poem must have a purpose.
Emotions, feelings. Exactly. So it should convey emotions so strongly that when the reader reads it, they feel enlightened. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Alright, so worthy purpose. What is the most important thing about this poem? What should the reader really pick up on? What should be the most important thing as they read it? His feelings. And if he conveys these feelings strongly, how should the reader feel after reading the poem? Yes. Enlightened, and then the last part too. Yep. I was just looking at some of your notes. It's okay. also should a poet do preparing himself? Through meditation. All right, about 1 minute to wrap this up, and then we'll discuss the class.
These questions sound repetitive. It's like repetitive. He's like asking you the same thing over and over.
Defining good. You're right. I mean, it's the same topic, just trying to make sure that we understand what he was saying.
Okay, so I was like, how?
Okay, so things have religion.
I'm about to say, it's just me, my own.
We'll just make a list, like a good poem should do what?
Okay.
I'm just trying to put it up with your friend.
Okay.
What's the purpose?
Yeah, because it's also powerful for the people to share.
Yeah, so what's the most important part of this poem?
The purpose of the feeling.
The feelings. The purpose is the feelings. The purpose is to convey those feelings. And if he conveys those feelings well, how will the reader feel?
They'll feel how he feels.
Huh?
They'll feel how he feels.
Good. So the reader will get those feelings, and by experiencing the feelings of the poet, he explains to us that after reading the poem, the reader will feel
Purified.
yes, purified and strengthened and enlightened. Yes, exactly. All right, let's finish this up. A couple of you. Most of you are finishing up, but a couple of you need another minute. So let's take 1 more minute to make sure that we've answered A through D, and then we will discuss it. But the point of all this is that we want to make a rubric, a checklist that we can use to grade Wordsworth on his own poems, okay? So start thinking about, if you're finished, start thinking about if you were going to be grading William Wordsworth's poetry, what are you looking for?
Okay, so it's the rubric, like, we do like a 1 through 10, 1 through 5.
We're just going to come up with 5 things that we can look for. We don't need to make that intense.
He's a professional poet.
Yes. What's in more classroom-friendly word for that?
Arrogant.
Arrogance. He does sound a little, maybe overconfident, a little arrogant.
What's
Yeah.
the other word?
Hubris?
Yeah.
Hubris. Maybe.
He's trying to think too
Maybe. I don't know if it's that intense, but maybe. Perhaps.
That we should
All right.
judge.
So let's start talking about it. Who can share with the class, in their own words, how does Wordsworth define a good poem? Marcus?
A good poem is a well thought expression of feelings that teaches and affectionates. I don't know if that's a word though.
And what's the affections?
Strength.
Strengthens them, so strengthens emotions. Okay, so that was really good. Repeat that for me. So a good poem is well thought out. Expression of feelings that what?
Teaches and
Teaches and strengthens emotions. Of the reader. Excellent. That was a wonderful definition. All right? And so, good. And as you guys notice as you're working, well, this definition is tied into the worthy purpose of poetry. All right? So, all poems should have this worthy purpose. How does he describe the purpose? What is the purpose of a romantic poem? Sammy.
He meditates and regulates his feelings, and then then when his feelings are expressed, he enables the audience to be enlightened.
Good. So a poet must meditate and clearly feel and think on these subjects. Okay, so that more fits into the what should a poet do. But once he's thought long and hard about it and he's ready to write, his poem should clearly convey emotion. And what was the second part?
Enlighten the audience.
Okay, so the worthy purpose of the poem is to convey the emotion and enlighten Enlighten the audience. Now, as I walked around, a couple of you said that the poet wants the reader to feel what? Or he wants to share what with the reader so that they can experience it as well? His feelings, okay? So the poet, Wordsworth, he really wants you to feel what he's feeling. When you read the poem, you should feel how he felt when he was writing, okay? Because he thinks that he can so clearly express his emotions that when you read his poem, you should feel how he felt. All right, good. All right, so based on this definition, can we break this down? What characteristics should a good poem have? Naya?
Clear purpose.
Okay, it should have a clear purpose.
Or worthy.
A worthy purpose, so it should have a clear purpose. And then that purpose is to what? Or what else should it have? What, Kenita?
Like passion, like the understanding of what exactly you're writing.
Okay, a passion. It should express deep understanding, deep thought, deep understanding of the subject that he's writing about. Good. Nala?
It should show sensibility.
Okay, it should show sensibility. And Gwen?
Inspire emotion.
Okay, it should inspire emotion. So it should make the reader feel, inspire emotion. Good.
I should enlighten.
Okay, and it should enlighten the reader. It should inspire their emotion, and then it should also enlighten them, teach them something. Good. All right, and then finally, so how does he define a poet? What should a poet do to prepare, and what should a poet do? Tyler?
I was thinking like he was trying to describe like poets and poetry as like art. It's like artists, they express their like feelings on paper, and everybody can come by, but each person gets like something different out of what the poet like intended. They might get a different purpose from it, and that's what they're really looking for.
Good. Okay, so he's really describing poetry as a form of art. Good. The poet is an artist. Very good. Okay, so he defines a poet. The poet is like an artist. All right? An artist who conveys what?
Feeling.
Conveys emotions. And what must the poet do in order to get to this state? How do you become this kind of poet? What must you do every day? Ophelia? Meditate. You must meditate. You must think long and deeply on the subject. All right, good. So, do we feel like we clearly understand how Wordsworth defines good poetry? Maybe it was overkill. We really got this, all right? So, all right. Now that we've discussed this, real quickly, let's just come up with 5 things that we should look for when we're reading Wordsworth's poems so that we can determine whether or not he followed his own rules of poetry. So what is the biggest thing, Tyler? Purpose, okay? And so he said his poem should have a worthy purpose, but what was that worthy purpose? So instead of writing purpose up here, let's break down what his purpose should be.
What it should do or what it should be?
What the poem should do.
It should enlighten the reader.
All right. So the first thing his poem should do, it should enlighten us. All right. So as we're reading this poem, we should feel enlightened. It should enlighten the reader, and we're the reader, so we get to decide if he's doing that. All right. Gwen?
Strengthen and purify.
Okay. So strengthen and purify our emotions. So basically, when we're feeling this poem, when we're reading this poem, we should feel deeply. Okay. It should make the reader feel deeply. Make the reader feel deep emotions. All right, so I'd like you to write down these characteristics, because this is how we're going to judge his poem once we start reading it. All right, so it should enlighten the reader. It should make us feel deep emotions. What else should this poem do or have? Nala?
We should be able to pay attention to the feelings instead of the action.
Okay, so it should have deep feelings. We'll break that into 2. So it should have deep emotions. And these deep emotions, it should emphasize emotions over plot or over situation. All right. So it should enlighten us. It should make us feel deep emotions. We should be able to see evidence. We should be able to see evidence of the poet's deep emotions. And the emotion should be more important than the plot or the situation. So this poem, the plot may not be very exciting, but it's more about what we're feeling. Can we come up with one more thing we could look for as we're reading this poem? Marcus?
The worthy purpose.
Huh?
The purpose.
Well, we kind of define the worthy purpose up here. Instead of just saying purpose, we should This is what the purpose should be made up of. Kenita?
Shouldn't it be like a nice flow to it, so like you're understanding what's going on?
Exactly, it should flow. And it should flow because how does he define a good poem? What were his words? Spontaneous overflow. Good. So there should be a flow. This should feel spontaneous. This should feel like a moment of expression. Okay, this shouldn't feel overwrought. It should have a nice flow. It should feel spontaneous. It should not feel overworked or overwrought. It should feel like just this poet is pouring out his emotions to us, and it's clearly coming through. All right? Now, if I gave you a rubric, okay, if I said write a poem, and this is what I want you to do, are these clear instructions on how to write a poem?
No.
Not really, okay? This is a very subjective rubric, all right? And subjective means it depends on how the reader feels. So Wordsworth is setting himself up here to be a little difficult because his definition of good poetry really depends on how the reader feels, okay? So it depends. And a classroom filled with teenagers 2 months away from graduating are really in the mood to connect to a poem? No. So maybe Wordsworth set himself up for a little bit of failure by making the audience really the determiner of if the poem is good or not. All right, so do we jot down this rubric? All right, so we're going to use these qualifications to judge his poem, The World is Too Much with Us. So if you would grab your books and open them to page 717, we're going to read this poem. First, I want you to read it silently, then we'll read it together and discuss it. All right? We're not doing that, no. Page 717. Grab your books, open them to 717. Can I hear? No, it's fine. Let me know if you need me to say something again. Thank you. All right, we have our books out? All right, let's take like 3 minutes quietly. I want everyone to look over and just read the poem on their own, okay? So have we all read the poem? Okay, so first impressions. How many of you felt the powerful emotions? Just raise your hand if you felt the powerful emotions flowing out of the poem onto you. Raise your hands high, I want to see. Okay. So, a couple of us just immediately felt the powerful emotions.
It's hard to understand.
It's hard to understand, so we gotta talk about it, we gotta kind of figure it out. Nice.
I felt like if I did completely understand it, it would be deep.
Okay. Okay. So maybe we gotta work on it a little bit, but once we get it, maybe we'll connect it, okay?
The first line was really powerful.
Okay. And let's talk about that in just a second. Tyler?
Right, I was going to feel like it feels as though we split ourselves away from something that was once us.
Okay, good. Very good. So the first line, which is also the title of the poem, the world is too much with us. The world is too much with us, okay? How do we connect to that? What kind of feeling is that expressing? This is just too much. Ophelia? Overwhelming. Exasperated, okay? How many of you have ever been sitting in class and just felt like this is too much? Filling out college applications, this is too much, okay? So there's a connection we can make immediately, all right? This poem was about someone feeling exasperated. This is too much. The world is too much, okay? And that's the tone we need to be feeling as we read this poem. That's the state our speaker's in. The world is too much with us. All right, do I have anyone who really is feeling this and wants to try to give us a dramatic reading of this poem? No, you want to try? Yeah, go ahead.
The world is too much with us, late and soon, getting and spending. We lay waste our powers, little we see in nature that is ours. We have given our hearts away, a sordid boon. The sea that bursts, that bears her bosom to the moon. The winds that will be howling at all hours, and are upgathered now like sleeping flowers. For this, for everything, we are out of tune. It moves us not. Great God! I'd rather be a pagan suckled in a creed outworn. So might I, standing on this pleasantly, have glimpse that would make me less forlorn, have sight of Proteus rising from the sea, or hear old Triton blow his wreathed horn.
All right, thank you. Good job, Tiara. Very nice, very nice. All right, so our speaker is exasperated. The world is too much with us. What's another way we could say that title? The world is too much. What's another way we could say that?
I'm over this.
I'm over this. I'm over the world. This is too much, which is what he said. I'm over the world. I'm done with it. All right, so what is the main point of this poem? What is he really saying? The world is too much with us. What feeling is he expressing? He's exasperated because why? Tyler was getting to it earlier. Well, how does he feel?
He feels that people have corrupted themselves away from nature, and like nature was supposed to be like originally ours, but we like pushed it away.
Okay, we've lost this deep connection to nature. We can't feel nature anymore. And he gives us some descriptions of nature that should make us feel awe, but we don't. What are these? What is this imagery he uses to describe the power of nature?
Didn't he use like the Greek mythology?
That's way down at the end.
The sea that bears her bosom.
The sea that bears her bosom to the moon. Okay, so describing the sea as laying itself out open to the moon. Okay, it's almost a little sexual there. Here.
Question: Are all romanticisms, most of them, all of nature?
Yeah, because that was one of our characteristics of Romanticism. So that we'll see that across romantic poems, this awe of nature. So we have the sea who's bearing her bosom to the moon. What else, Simeon?
The winds that would be howling at all hours.
Okay, the winds that are howling at all hours. So we have these very vivid, powerful descriptions of nature. But how do we feel about it? Gwen? Yeah. He says in line, let's look at line 9. For this, for everything, we are out of tune. What does it mean to be out of tune with something?
You're not
We're not getting it. We're not feeling it. That connection we should have with nature, it's gone. We've lost it. It moves us not. So what doesn't happen to us when we see it? We don't care. We don't care about it. We have this vast ocean. We have this powerful wind, and we don't care. Okay? So he's upset because he feels that we have lost our connection to nature. We have given ourselves away. We should be one with nature, but what do we care more about? Think back to the poem on Tuesday. What is more important to mankind? We've lost our connection to nature because...
The past.
Okay. Somewhat because of our lives. Because of... So we have what's made by nature and what's made by man. So what has man created? Civilization, society. So we've taken our hearts out of nature and we've poured our hearts into society, into civilization. So we have this separation with nature. And when we see these beautiful things like the moon, like the ocean, okay, we don't feel that connection anymore, all right? So he's feeling so exasperated that what does he do? Where do we see deep emotion in this poem after he explains why he's exasperated? He says great God. He says great God. So he has this interjection. And what does he do in the poem, Alexis, that shows us that there's powerful emotion? Other than just shouting great God, what signifies this as powerful emotion?
Well, me personally, I like the imagery. It makes me see more in the poem. I see it myself. But
with that phrase, great God, what does he do after saying great God that he does nowhere else in the poem to really show us this is a powerful emotion?
I'd rather be a pagan something than a free outlaw.
Okay, so then he
basically saying that.
Basically, he's frustrated.
Okay, he's frustrated. And then he explains to us how he'd rather be, but how does he express that frustration that we can see it when we read?
By the contrast.
I'm looking, you guys are being really deep. I'm looking for something really simple. Exclamation point.
But he does it again, though. Like you say
he does it again? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Okay. I apologize. I was right. So those exclamation points, okay? So these poems contain exclamation points, and we know when we're writing, we only use an exclamation point to convey excitement, deep feeling. So he's really hitting us over the head with this great God, all right? Now the exclamation point, great God. And when Tiara read it, what did she do?
She like,
yeah, great God. I don't know if William Wordsworth would have said it like that, great God. But you know, he did a good job conveying emotion there. Good. All right, great God.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
So are his poems like, like sad or like about nature and things like that?
Well, these two that we've read are nature is a big theme in his poetry, and then there is frustration. He's frustrated. What is he frustrated with in this poem again? Man, the world. When he says the world is too much with us, is he talking about the natural world, or what is he talking about? The world we've made, civilization, the world that we've made. That's what is too much with us. All right, Tier.
I was saying if he's talking about man, why did he use like Greek mythology?
Good. Okay, so let's talk about the last part. All right. So the first 8 lines of this poem set up a problem. All right. The problem is the world is too much with us. Okay. We are overwhelmed. We are exasperated. And then the last 6 lines are going to give us the solution. Okay. So the allusion to Greek mythology, that is the solution. So we'll talk about that in just a second. But if we have 8 lines and then 6 lines, how many lines do we have in this poem? 14. And what is a 14-line poem? A sonnet. All right, so this is a sonnet. Now, this is not a Shakespearean sonnet because the last 2 lines of all Shakespearean sonnets do what?
Couplet.
A rhyming couplet. And if we look at this poem, do we have a rhyming couplet at the end? No. All right, this is actually an Italian sonnet. All right, and in Italian sonnets, the basic form is the first 8 lines, or the octave, sets up a problem, and the last 6 lines, or the sestet, offers a solution. Okay, so if we look at this poem, we can see, first 8 lines, we have the problem. The world is too much with us, we're exasperated. The last 6 lines, we have the solution. So we have to figure out what his solution is, all right? Great God. I'd rather be a pagan, suckled in a creed outworn, all right? And your book does not really do a good job with the explanations here. So what's a pagan? Think way back to when we talked about Beowulf, pagans, DeAndre?
Those people that worship like a bunch of different idols.
Okay. A polytheistic religion, something kind of pre-Christianity, all right? And because we have the allusion to Greek mythology, we can assume he's talking about what religion? Just ancient Greek, yeah. Just ancient Greek. That was a little...
You said Greek mythology?
Yes. All right, so he wishes he followed an older polytheistic religion like ancient Greek mythology, all right? So I would rather be someone who, a pagan and suckled in a creed outworn, I'd rather be someone who believed in an outdated religion, okay? So my I, standing on this pleasant lea, okay, what does our book say lea is?
Meadow.
A meadow. Okay, so if I was standing in this pleasant meadow, have glimpses that would make me less forlorn. What does it mean to be forlorn?
To want something?
It can be a deep longing, to be forlorn, a deep longing. And what comes with a deep, painful longing? Sadness, okay? So he's telling us he feels sad. He's standing here in this meadow, and he's feeling really sad. But he thinks that if he was a pagan, he would feel less sad, because why? He says, have sight of Proteus rising from the sea, or hear old Triton blow his wreathed horn. So when he was looking at nature, if he was a pagan, what would he see in nature? Proteus and Triton, who are Greek gods. So when he's looking at nature, he would see gods. He would have a deeper connection. He would have more reverence, more respect for it. Okay? So he's saying he wishes that he followed this old religion because then when he looked at nature, he would feel this deeper connection that he lacks now. Because how do modern people feel? Does nature move them? How do they feel when they're out in nature? They're over it. It's too much. We're not even going to pay attention to it because there's too much going on up here. There's too much homework. There's too much college applications. There's just too much, okay? So we're not even going to look at the world and see it. But maybe if we were pagans, we could see it and we could be deeply moved. Tier?
Is it saying like knowledge is a corruption?
Okay, yeah, perhaps. Knowledge corrupts us. That's a very broad term. Certain knowledge is purifying. What kind of knowledge did the Romantics value?
Knowledge, nature.
Nature. How did they think we should experience things? Look at our notes from yesterday. That's like one of the first things we talked about yesterday.
Is it because they value emotion over reason?
Yes, they valued emotion over reason. So emotional knowledge is good, but reason and what kind of science and scientific knowledge, okay? So when we look at nature and we just are like, okay, well, the tide's coming in and out because of the moon and, you know, really quantifying it, that's not what they care about. They care about the quality. They care about the emotions behind it, all right? So not all knowledge is corruption, but that's scientific knowledge. Emotional knowledge is what purifies us. Naya?
When I read the first line, the world is too much with us, I was thinking he meant like the world would be better off without humans.
Okay.
But then the late and soon part comes through.
Okay. Let's talk about that because that's something that we kind of skipped over. Late and soon, getting and spending. What are those examples of? Late and soon, getting, spending, opposite. So, paradox. All right. Yes. Paradox. So there's paradoxes, and these paradoxes, these contradictions can make us feel overwhelmed because they're confusing. We don't understand them. Your interpretation that the world would be better off without us, I can see that, and I think you could analyze it and show that. But at the end, he brings everything back to himself again. And his message at the end, after he gives us the problem, the message isn't, we should all go away. The message is what? We should appreciate it. We should appreciate it. Okay, so do we feel better about the meaning of the poem?
Yeah. When he said late and soon, is he talking about for when we get to places like we're either too late or we're either too soon?
Yeah, so nothing's ever right. We're either late, we're either soon. Nothing's ever on time, nothing is ever right. Okay? And I feel like it was in here, Naya, that we had that conversation about time and how we should just get rid of it. Who created what we call time in these clocks? Man. Okay, not who specifically, but man did this. Nature didn't give us this. Nature gave us what to judge time? The sun, okay? The sun. And it's more of a, we talked about if we got rid of all the clocks, would that mean that time went away? Well, we would still be rotating around the sun, and so, all right, Tier?
I was going to say, so is it like this point just referring to like God in a way? Because I know like getting and spending, I'm thinking of greed and sparing the rod.
Okay. I think you could definitely see that illusion there. I didn't pick up on that, but yeah, I think you could see that. Good point. Kanoe?
I was going to ask if you could explain line 4, because it says something about sword, boom, and it's like dirty favor. Like, what does he mean by that?
Good. And I'm glad you brought that up because I meant to talk about that. All right. So Tyler said that we've split from nature. We're supposed to be with nature, okay? We have given our hearts away a sordid boon, a dirty favor. You've given your heart away, and it's dirty, okay? What does that sound like? If you give your heart away, relax just a little bit.
Sold it to the devil.
Maybe. Okay.
Or fell in love
Corrupted.
with a bad person.
Okay. All right. So we're supposed to be with nature. Our hearts are supposed to be with nature, but we gave our heart away to what we created, to mankind, to civilization. So it's almost like we're having an affair with ourselves. We were supposed to be one with nature and be, have that deep connection. All right. But we gave our hearts away to ourselves, to mankind. Okay. So that it's like comparing our split from nature to us having an affair.
Yeah. Also, kind of like you're in a relationship with nature, but then you. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Now,
So, then you would say that love is man-made.
That was deep.
Yes, that, I like that. That love is man-made. Well, I think he's using the metaphor of romantic love to show how we've split from nature and now we're given to ourselves. But he's saying we should have that connection to nature, so that love is something natural, but the way we're loving is not pure anymore. It's not natural anymore. Perhaps. That was a good point. All right, so we've kind of paraphrased, talked about the poem. Do we feel like we have a better understanding of it now? We understand the emotions he's trying to convey?
Yes.
So our poet, what is the emotion he feels?
He feels like
Emptiness, overwhelmed, disappointment. Good. All right. So when we read this poem, how should we feel? Okay. We should feel disappointed. We should feel forlorn. We should feel upset with what we've done to ourselves. All right. So let's use these characteristics to judge this poem. So hopefully you wrote these down on your paper. I want everyone just to take a minute or two and just go through. And if you think this poem enlightened you, because you're the reader, you decide, give it a plus. If you don't think it did, give it a minus. If it made you feel deep emotions, plus, okay? So just go through and give it a plus if it did it, and a minus if it didn't, okay? So I want us all to analyze this poem based on what Wordsworth himself said.
I think we did for either person.
So yeah, just these things that we put up here. If you think he did it, just give it a plus, like he did it. If you think he didn't, give it a minus. Or you can give it a check or an X.
Do you want to yeah, plus and which one you think it is?
And just go through. If he did it, give it a plus. Yeah. If it enlightened you, then say yes, he did it. If it didn't, then no, he didn't do it. You don't have to use pluses and minuses. Those are just the symbols I thought of yesterday.
It's fine. So it's enlightened reader the same as the purpose.
Alright, it looks like some of you guys are already done. I'm going to give everyone another couple of seconds to decide, and then we'll discuss. I want to do like the class vote. We'll judge. We are the judge. Wordsworth told us what poetry should look like and what it should do, and now we decide it is poem doing. Alright, so let me pick another color so that we can see our results. Alright, so raise your hand if now that we've read it, we discussed it, we understand it, if you think this poem enlightened us, taught us something. Raise your hand if you gave this poem a positive for enlightened. There may have been next hand. Okay, so we'll say about 13 of us. So it appears that the majority of the class were in the plus category, about 13. Alright, so raise your hand if you said no. I don't think so. Okay, so we have 4. So no, it didn't teach you anything. Okay, because this was made subjective. This purpose that he set out is subjective. If this poem doesn't reach you, doesn't teach you, I mean, that's up to you. All right, how many of you thought that this poem made you feel a deep emotion? Let's raise our hand if we felt a deep emotion. This is interesting. Okay, we're slowly raising our hands. Okay. I think that's interesting that a lot of us thought we were enlightened, but we were not really that emotional about it. Whatever. All right, so raise your hand if you didn't really feel emotion. You didn't get that. You didn't feel his emotion. And that's his big thing.
Wait.
So,
is it that we felt deeply, or that we could tell that he felt deeply?
That you felt deeply.
Okay.
So you didn't feel deeply. So 4. All right. So if we didn't feel deeply, if half the class did not have a deep feeling when they read this poem, and that's his whole thing.
He failed.
I don't know. Maybe he already failed. All right. Did you see evidence of his deep emotions when you read the poem? Okay, raise your hand if you saw evidence of his deep emotions when you read the poem. All right. So I think almost everyone. Elijah, do you mean to not raise your hand? Yeah. Okay, so tell us, since you're the only one, I want to hear your point of view. Why don't you think he felt deep emotions in this poem? Okay. So you think that the allusions to the Greek gods fell flat. That didn't really create any emotion. Okay. Because, okay, I can see that. That's not necessarily a very emotional thing to us. All right? Okay. But the rest of us saw evidence of deep emotions. So most people felt yes, but one person said no. And I mean, I think you could have a good argument for no. These exclamation points we talked about, okay? If your emotions are really that strong, do you need exclamation points?
Nope.
No, they almost feel forced. Okay? I'm really excited about this exclamation point. If you really felt that strongly, we would know. We wouldn't need it. You know?
And another thing, like, a lot of people use exclamation points a lot. Like, in everyday life, see it a lot, so it kind of helps you lose value.
Yeah, we're kind of numb to them. It doesn't really mean anything to us. Okay, good. Gwen?
If you could make an argument for yes with the good gods, because it's like religion is a big thing. So he's saying, I'd rather change my religion just so I could be connected to nature.
That's a really good point. A lot of people have deep emotional ties to religion, and faith is a very emotional thing. So if someone's saying, I am so frustrated with life that I think I need to get rid of my religion, then perhaps that is a very deep expression of emotion. Good point. Good point. All right, anyone else want to talk about conveying emotions? All right. Now, what was the plot in this poem? What was he doing? He's in the middle. We don't even know. So we don't even know.
He's standing in the middle.
He's just standing in the middle. Okay? So the emotions, what was more important? The emotions or the plot?
The emotions.
Okay, so are we kind of unanimous on that one?
Yeah.
Standing in a meadow. Okay, so he hit that one. His emotions were definitely more important to him than the situation. Now, here I am standing in the meadow. Last poem, here I am sitting under some trees. Alright, so the last one, flow. Do we think this poem flowed? Do we think it felt spontaneous? Was it like a quick outburst of emotion? Okay? So raise your hand if you felt that. If you think he did a good job with this spontaneous flow of feelings. Alright, so most of us, but I have a couple of people who say no. So I have about 13 who said yes, and about 4 who said no. Someone who said no, what made this feel not so spontaneous to you?
Well, I feel like spontaneous isn't a good flow.
Okay. Alright.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, that was his own terminology, though. I think what he means is, it's like, it's not like you're sitting here and planning it and going back and revising. It's just coming straight out of you. It's just because you've thought so long and hard on a subject that when you're ready to write, you just express yourself. Almost like freestyle. Huh?
I doubt he wrote.
Okay, and we can say maybe we don't believe him. Marcus?
So if that's the case, why does it rhyme?
Alright, good point. Well, I don't know. I mean, freestyling, does anyone, rappers get up there, and some people can do it, some people have that gift. I do not have that gift, but maybe he's just that great.
I got that gift.
Alexis?
It just seemed like he was thinking too much about it.
Okay, there was maybe too much thought for it to be spontaneous. There was more thought than maybe he. Okay. Tiara?
I believe I said it was spontaneous. It was like, because on line 9, when he said it moves us not, and he yelled out like great God, it was like in a way a conversation, because you don't nobody just like put great God in the thing.
Okay. Yeah, because the tone shifts so starkly there. He's just talking, he's frustrated, great God. Okay, so it seemed like spontaneous. I see that. And Simeon, did you still want to add?
Nope.
No? Okay. All right, so we went through as a class and we decided, we judged how well he did on this poem. And so what I want you guys to do individually to pull all of your thoughts together. We're going to do just a 5-minute essay. Now, it's really more of an essay outline, okay? So what I want you to do, I'm going to give you 5 minutes. I want you to answer the question, based on Wordsworth's own definition, was The World Is Too Much With Us a good poem? Okay? So you're going to write a thesis statement. Your thesis statement will answer what question? Right here.
Was it a good poem?
Okay? So you can say yes or no. It is up to you based on how you evaluated it. And then I want you to find 3 pieces of evidence to support your thesis. Now this evidence needs to be a little deeper than I didn't feel anything. Okay? I didn't feel anything because think about using some lines from the poem to support your thesis. All right? Any questions? Yes, Norman. Based on his definition. Based on Wordsworth's own definition. Not what you think a good poem should be. We're using his definition and we're applying it to his poem. He said a good poem should do this. Did it. Did The World Is Too Much With Us do it? Okay? Alright, any other questions? Alright, so let's take 5 minutes, and then we will share and discuss, and I'll collect them.